Good morning. I'm David Rollafson. I'm Director of Transportation for TRL. And if our aspiration is all cars and vans to be electric by 2040, I thought it might be useful just to identify where we're starting from. So, the electric vehicle grant was introduced about 7 or 8 years ago. And so far, we've got about 170,000 vehicles on the road. That, in context, is just 1 month's new vehicle sales. And you can see by the SMMT figures, whilst we've seen a growth in plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which is quite promising, EV sales have remained flat. The challenge we have is to get from where we are now, of being less than 1% of the total vehicle sales, to being 100%. And really, on the adoption curve, the people that are buying EVs at the moment are innovators. They're not quite representative of the mainstream consumer that we need to reach collectively to get to 100%. This isn't really about technology. That problem's been solved. This is all about consumer behavior, consumer perception of electric vehicles, purchase intent, and how they'll use them. So, taking the issue, it's not about technology anymore. Previously, our big concern's been all about range anxiety. Well, that's actually not the concern for most people now, because that problem's being solved. Excluding cars like the Teslas, my little graphic on the right-hand side here shows our affordable EV and PHEVs, and clearly some of those vehicles are getting into a level of range which makes them viable for many more people. But that itself is not going to make people suddenly decide to buy an EV, because the real consideration is, for that consumer, is it a viable, practical, economic purchase? And what's really important is the different incentives, motivators and cost savings that will cause people to change. Into that you can factor how people will perceive these vehicles to depreciate, and what their view is as to whether there'll be acceptable charging where they live and where they'll drive to en route to their destination. Public charging, fast public charging, in my view, is going to be absolutely key. So the question is, what's TRL doing to accelerate this consumer adoption? Well, we've just completed a £5 million trial called Consumers, Vehicles and Energy Integration. And that was quite unique because it's the biggest trial of its type. It placed into consumers' hands plug-in and electric vehicles before they made a purchase decision to go buy one. If you like, it's a try before you buy. And it gave us the opportunity to survey their perceptions before they'd tried the different vehicles. We gave them the vehicles, a conventional vehicle, a plug-in equivalent, and a pure electric vehicle over a period of weeks, and observed how their usage changed. We also looked at how they charged those vehicles. This is a big undertaking because in the trial, over 440 people were involved. They drove over 500,000 miles, and we looked at their charging behavior and usage behavior. The trial's completed just recently, last month, and we're currently analysing those results. So hopefully our intention is to really provide independent insight to many of the different factions of industry that have a part to play, be they energy suppliers, OEMs, dealer networks, car leasing companies, even property developers. We also looked at how users will engage with different models of charging. So the example I've put up here is an application which enabled the user to engage in terms of unconstrained charging when they wanted to enable them to manage through an app when their vehicle would charge, and also their predisposition to allow their energy supplier to decide the optimum time for them to charge the vehicle so it is ready for whatever their usage pattern was. My final slide introduces some of the questions that the finding of this trial will seek to answer. For example, did people feel EVs were viable today what incentives really motivated them, the importance of public charging infrastructure, and a range of other different factors. I'm not going to go through all of them on the slide, but the key one there for mass adoption is the choice of an electric vehicle as a main car, not just as a second car. That's what's really going to drive the level of consumer adoption we need to get to our 2040 aspiration. So if you go back to my first slide and look at point A, where we are now, and point B, where we've got to get to in 2040 or even 2030, the growth we need to achieve in terms of people making purchase decisions for EVs is really quite astounding. And to add some context to that, a similar compound growth rate over a decade, a good analogy would be one of these things. You're looking at the same kind of growth rates that Apple achieved for the iPhone starting in 2007. We have to collectively get the same level of purchase enthusiasm in the general motoring public to adopt EVs as Steve Jobs got to people in terms of adopting a very engaging piece of technology. And that's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge because it's a vehicle. It's an expensive purchase decision. But that's a challenge in front of us to reach 2040. And hopefully this study will inform many as to how we'll do that. Thank you very much for your attention.